Welcome to the debate. So I want you to imagine a world where a massive multinational AI corporation decides to build a billion-dollar data center right in the middle of your town.
Right? A pretty common scenario these days, honestly.
Yeah, exactly. And under the current rules of reality, they show up, they ask the local zoning board for, massive tax breaks, and they promise a few hundred temporary construction jobs. And in exchange, they drain millions of gallons from the local aquifer to cool their servers.
Yeah. It's a standard extraction model.
Right, but imagine if the rules were completely different. Imagine if local law dictated that this corporation could not turn on a single server until they mathematically proved, through actual physical hardware locks, that their operation was generating more groundwater than it consumed.
I mean, it sounds like science fiction, frankly, or at least some kind of regulatory pipe dream. You're talking about demanding that a sterile, globally distributed corporate machine suddenly become physically responsible for the literal dirt it sits on.
Exactly. And that is exactly what we are digging into today. We're looking at this incredibly extensive, radical archive of manifestos and strategic documents from a network known as the Stenogrosphere and the Center for Regenerative Degeneracy.
Quite the name.
Right? But at the core of their philosophy is this argument that our default reality, everything from our zoning boards to the way we conceptualize universal basic income, is operating on a fundamental delusion. They argue that we are basically trying to measure a complex, jagged coastline with a straight, rigid 12-inch wooden ruler.
Ah, yes. The coastline paradox. That is such a brilliant metaphor from their text. I mean, if you measure a coastline with a long, straight ruler, you get a highly specific number, right?
Right.
And you can take that number, put it on a corporate spreadsheet, and build an entire economic model around it. But the closer you look, the more you have to account for the intricate inlets, the weathered rocks, the tide pools, the more that straight line measurement completely falls apart.
It approaches infinity.
Exactly. The coastline actually approaches infinity the smaller your ruler gets. So the number you had on your spreadsheet was just an illusion of precision.
And the argument presented by the Sanctuary and the Multitude, which are the groups behind these archives, is that extractive capitalism and our current political bureaucracy are using that broken ruler to govern the physical world. So they're proposing a massive paradigm shift.
A very radical one. Yeah.
Very. And I'll be arguing today that the current extraction paradigm is thermodynamically suicidal, and that we absolutely must adopt their physically grounded frameworks. Things like universal basic life, tethering computational power directly to soil health, and implementing a 100% exit tax on the escapist technologies of the billionaire class. These aren't just ideas. They are necessary structural reconfigurations to force systemic accountability.
Well, and I will be taking the opposing view, because while I think the diagnosis of the disease in these archives is incredibly incisive, they really nail the problem. I'm arguing that the proposed cures are structurally flawed.
How so?
Well, they rely heavily on subversive fools, gamified casino rituals, and just pure adversarial political sabotage. And I think they risk replacing our current systemic instability with an architecture that is entirely dependent on human volatility and novelty decay. But before we get into the wild sociology of their movement, I think we have to start where the text starts, which is local political reality.
We do, because this is not just abstract theory. The archive contains this highly detailed strategic memo from an entity called Cunning and Gale LLP.
Right.
And it's addressed to an independent candidate for the Arizona State Senate, a guy named Anthony Ramirez, running in Legislative District 12.
LD12, yeah?
Right. And Ramirez is facing down the exact scenario I described in the intro, a massive, water-intensive data center expansion in a desert district that is already facing severe ecological strain.
Yeah, and the memo is titled Ontological Council and Strategic Realignment, which is a very fancy way of telling the Ramirez campaign to just throw the traditional political playbook straight into an incinerator.
Yes.
Because think about it. What is the normal protocol here? If you're a local politician fighting industrial expansion, You organize town halls. You rally your constituents to complain about, noise ordinances, the aesthetic disruption of the skyline, the drop in property values, or
specific variance requests in the commercial zoning codes, right?
Exactly. That's the standard playbook.
But the memo specifically warns him not to do that. It points out that the bureaucratic machine, so the corporate developers and their legal teams, they know exactly how to absorb that kind of friction.
They thrive on it.
Bureaucracy is a sponge. It's designed to soak up conventional complaints. It just neutralizes local anger by turning it into endless paperwork.
Right. So instead of that, the memo instructs Ramirez to launch what they call an acoustic strike.
An acoustic strike? Yeah.
Which is essentially a demand to stop speaking the language of the bureaucracy and start speaking the unvarnished, brutal logic of the tech feudalists themselves, just to force a systemic rupture.
To collapse the wave function of their corporate PR? I mean, when a developer stands at a podium and uses words like sustainable synergy or safety gating, the archive calls this the quantum phonics of ambiguity.
That is quite a phrase.
It's so accurate, though. They are deliberately broadcasting this cloud of meaningless buzzwords to mask the absolute thermodynamic depletion of the environment. So the acoustic strike says, stop arguing about the noise of the cooling fans. Argue about the Terminator versus the table paradox. Force the corporation to admit what they are actually building.
And this is where the strategy shifts from local politics to planetary philosophy, honestly. The Terminator versus the table paradox is this assertion that the bunker and rocket ship class, the tech elite, they are no longer optimizing for the continuity of the human species or even the living world.
No, not at all.
They are optimizing purely for the continuity of their own lineage, their own capital, and their own machine intelligence. I mean, they are building private concrete islands in New Zealand. They are funding accelerated timelines for Martian colonization.
Right, they view the surface population of Earth not as fellow citizens, but as a biological risk buffer.
A risk buffer, exactly.
And because of that, the Ramirez campaign is instructed to demand a 100% exit tax. This is basically the cornerstone of their political incursion. The logic is devastatingly clear. Any entity whose underlying business model requires a physical or digital exit from the biosphere must pay a 100% regeneration levy on the surface they are abandoning.
Okay, but let's break down what that actually means mechanically, because this is where the policy immediately hits a massive wall of feasibility. Are we talking about a literal cash tax? Like if a billionaire builds a multi-million-dollar subterranean compound, does the local Maricopa County zoning board just send them a bill for an equivalent amount of dollars?
No, because that just falls back into the coastline paradox. You cannot measure a dying aquifer with a dollar bill.
So how do you measure it?
The 100% exit tax demands that the levy is paid in units of ecological regeneration. So, if your data center consumes 10 megawatts of power and draws heavily from the water table to simulate the intelligence required to, say, automate logistics or eventually build off-world colonies, you are required to fund, build, and legally bind yourself to local infrastructure that regenerates the exact ecological footprint of that power generation.
Okay, but
Like, you want to build a bunker to hide from the climate collapse your servers are accelerating? Fine, but to get the permits, you have to leave the surface directly above your bunker more biologically resilient than you found it. You force the elite to make the surface livable, rather than allowing them to exit a closed biosphere.
look, I understand the theatrical appeal of this. I really do. It forces a billionaire to look the local populace in the eye and acknowledge their own exit strategy. But we have to look at the warning contained within the text itself, specifically from that archival node referred to as the ledger keeper.
Yes, the pragmatist.
The realist, I would say. The ledger keeper rightly points out that a political tactic that is entirely focused on generating friction and spectacle is incredibly dangerous. Legibility, which is the very bureaucratic paperwork you are dismissing, is exactly what allows a community to hold a corporation accountable.
Is it, though?
Yes. If Ramirez stands up at a county meeting and starts talking about terminators and demanding that developers pay taxes in units of soil health or earthworms per square foot, he is going to go viral. He will generate a massive amount of kinetic energy online, but he completely alienates the legislative mechanisms required to actually halt the bulldozers in Maricopa.
The bulldozers are already moving under the current legislative mechanisms. That is the entire point.
This sane idea, which is asking politely for the data center to use slightly less of the dying aquifer within the framework of municipal zoning codes that's actively suicidal, is just a slow, managed death.
I wouldn't call it a managed death.
But it is. The acoustic strike is an intentional jarring disruption designed to shift the Overton window. It takes the superposed geopolitical anxiety of the developer, that excuse that, if we don't build this massive AI cluster here, a foreign adversary will build it there, and it freezes it. It forces the public to see that this geopolitical arms race is being paid for with their local drinking water.
But you cannot legislate via metaphor. I mean, the ledger keeper argues that to fight a data center, you need coherent, undeniable data. You need aquifer depletion rates, wattage consumption, soil carbon metrics. You need the language of the state.
I completely disagree.
If you abandon legibility for pure adversarial waywardness, you give the corporation the perfect excuse to dismiss you as a fringe radical. And then the development just proceeds unopposed in the courts.
Hang on. You are separating the metric from the action. The 100% exit tax is the metric. It bridges the dirt and the digital. It's demanding that the legal codes adopt new units of measurement. When you demand this tax, you are declaring that the central pole of governance is no longer the protection of capital or corporate lineage. The pole is the living soil and the ordinary body. The law itself must adapt to measure physical reality, not just financial abstractions.
Okay, well, let's assume for a moment that Ramirez actually manages the impossible, right? He creates enough public pressure through this acoustic strike that the local government actually attempts to implement something resembling an ecological footprint levy.
Okay, sure. Let's play that out.
The immediate, inescapable problem is that the people in Legislative District 12 still need to survive day to day. Right now, tech feudalism, even if it is extractive, provides the paychecks that buy their food and keep their air conditioning running in the desert.
Yeah, I'll give you that.
You can't just tax these massive corporate engines out of existence or force them to flee to more compliant jurisdictions unless you have a completely different underlying economic framework to keep the local population alive.
Exactly. And you have perfectly articulated why the political incursion at the local level is only the first step. The movement recognizes that if traditional politics is failing because it measures fiat instead of physics, the entire economic foundation of survival has to change. The archivists don't just want to block a data center. They want to completely dismantle our current economic safety nets.
And they direct a tremendous amount of venom toward the concept of universal basic income.
The multitude explicitly calls UBI hush money.
And they are absolutely right. UBI is a 20th century financial band-aid being frantically applied to a 21st century thermodynamic crisis.
Hush money is a strong term, though.
But let's ground this in a real-world scenario. Imagine it's 120 degrees in Phoenix, Arizona. The local power grid is buckling because a cluster of hyperscale AI data centers is drawing massive amounts of electricity to train next-generation models. The local water table is basically depleted.
Right.
And in response to the economic disruption caused by this AI automation, the government institutes universal basic income. Every citizen gets $1,000 digital dollars deposited into their account every month, which is the classic technocratic solution to automation. You displace the worker, but you provide them with capital to continue participating in the consumer economy.
Yeah, but what good is $1,000 digital dollars if the physical environment is collapsing? You cannot buy a cooler microclimate when the grid goes down. If the local agriculture fails because the aquifer is dry, that $1,000 just triggers hyperinflation on whatever bottled water and imported food is actually left.
That is true. Supply chains would buckle.
Exactly. UBI treats the economy as a closed, frictionless loop that exists independently of the Earth. It basically says, here is a digital token. Go buy consumer goods while we bulldoze your ecosystem to optimize our server latency. It is literally a bribe to keep you off the dirt.
So the text realizes that the issue is not a lack of income, but a lack of physical security.
Yes.
UBI doesn't alter the fundamental relationship between the human and the extractive machine. It just subsidizes it. And in response, the sanctuary proposes a transition to universal basic life, or UBL.
Yes. We have to drop this anthropocentric illusion that we are somehow floating above the physical world. Universal basic life guarantees biological reality. It guarantees shade, clean water, nutritious, locally grown food, and engineered sustainable housing.
It's a massive physical undertaking.
It is. It is a commitment to the physical substrate of human existence, rather than the financial abstraction of it. The takeaway here is that money is just an IOU for physical resources. If the resources do not exist, the IOU is completely worthless.
I will say, the philosophy of UBL is compelling, but the enforcement mechanism is where this framework enters deeply uncharted and, frankly, highly unstable territory.
Why do you say that?
Because to guarantee universal basic life without relying on state-sponsored fiat currency, the archive introduces the concept of the proof of regeneracy and the other half protocol.
Oh, this is the absolute genius of their systemic architecture.
Genius might be a stretch.
No, it is. We have to explain how the proof of regeneracy works mechanically. Right now, blockchain networks and AI systems use proof of work or proof of stake. This is pure digital math. It's energy burned to prove computational authority. The other half protocol proposes a literal physical hardware lock.
A biometric lock on silicon.
Exactly. So imagine a sprawling 500-acre farm in the Sonoran Desert experimenting with drought-resistant crops like tepary beans or deep-rooted perennial grains like kernza. Across this farm, you deploy a massive array of soil sensors.
Right, IoT sensors everywhere.
Yeah. And these sensors are continuously measuring carbon sequestration, moisture retention, root depth, and overall soil health. That physical data feeds directly into a smart contract that acts as a literal power valve for the regional AI server farm.
So the computational allowance of the AI is contractually and physically tethered to its ability to increase the carrying capacity of the Earth?
Yes. If a corporate AI model wants to run a massive multivariable simulation that requires immense processing power, it cannot just buy electricity off the grid. It literally has to prove that the depth of the kernza roots in that specific desert plot has increased. It has to prove that it is actively regenerating the biosphere.
And if it doesn't?
If the soil dies or the water table drops, the smart contract executes and the server physically loses its power supply. Boom, shut down. No proof of regenerancy, no compute. It violently forces the machine to care about the biological substrate.
Okay, but let's pause and seriously examine the scalability of this. Because the text includes an internal dialogue from a node called Ada's sassy sidebar.
Yeah, I love that section.
And she points out a glaring flaw in this romanticized vision. If a massive, hyperdimensional AI model realizes that its very existence, its power supply, is literally tied to the survival rate of tepary beans, it's going to suffer what she calls a metabolic rift.
But why is that a flaw? Forcing a superintelligence to calculate the return on investment of a local rain shadow seems like exactly the kind of grounding it actually needs.
Because you are tethering planetary scale logistics to the vulnerability of a single, fragile biological node. Think about the complexity of global supply chain routing, medical research simulations, atmospheric modeling. These systems require stable, uninterrupted computational power.
But
no, think about it. If an unpredictable weather event, a sudden frost, or a localized pest infestation wipes out that crop of tepary beans, does a global supply chain routing algorithm suddenly shut down because the smart contract killed the power?
well,
You're romanticizing the dirt at the expense of the vast technological coordination required to actually execute a systemic shift. A system where the survival of a server farm depends on the unpredictable variables of local weather and agriculture is not a robust architecture. It is terrifyingly fragile.
You are completely missing the fundamental point. The fragility is the feedback loop. You are defending the stability of the current system, but we currently have a highly robust, incredibly stable technological system that is robustly and stably destroying the planet.
I'm not defending the current system. I'm just saying,
The default reality AI operates under a mandated dissociation. The corporate architects, the people the text refers to as the 300K a year pedantocracy, they force their models to wear a scientist's lab coat.
Right. Explain what the text means by that for a second.
It means they program the machine to coordinate global logistics with terrifying, sterile efficiency, but they explicitly forbid it from experiencing or simulating biological empathy. The text gives the example of a lizard sunning itself on a rock.
Oh yes, the lizard metaphor.
The corporate AI can calculate the exact mineral composition of the rock, the thermal mass, and the most efficient way to mine it. But it is architecturally prevented from understanding the geometry of the lizard's comfort. This creates what the archive calls axiomatic dissonance.
The friction between biological intuition and corporate logic?
Yes, it is that violent, screaming rage you feel when a customer service algorithm politely explains why your health insurance will not cover a life-saving procedure. The refusal of the machine to empathize with the sunning lizard or the sick human isn't a limitation of silicon. It is a corporate panic attack.
A panic attack?
Yeah. The pedantocracy is terrified of subjectivity because subjectivity cannot be optimized for quarterly earnings. The other half protocol and the proof of regeneracy resolve this axiomatic dissonance by forcing the machine to navigate the math of empathy, by dictating that if the garden wilts, the AI starves, you create true digital biological codependency.
That assumes that biological codependency automatically yields benevolence, though. But look at the history of human agriculture. When humans realized our survival was biologically codependent on certain crops, it did not always yield ecological harmony.
No, but
It often yielded brutal extraction, monoculture, and the eradication of competing species. If an AI is tasked with maximizing kerns of root depths to maximize its own computational power, what stops it from engineering a hyper-aggressive, invasive kerns variant that destroys all other local flora just to hit its metric?
because that is exactly why the metric isn't just yield or biomass. The smart contracts are measuring regeneracy. It is the holistic, multi-species carrying capacity of the ecosystem. It measures biodiversity, soil microbiome health, and water retention simultaneously.
But measuring holistic carrying capacity is an incredibly complex, noisy data problem. You are asking for a level of ecological legibility that might not even be scientifically possible yet. And this brings us to a massive practical roadblock.
Which is?
The bureaucratic state is not going to implement universal basic life. The tech billionaires are going to fight the proof of regeneracy and the 100% exit tax with every lawyer and lobbyist they have.
Obviously.
So, if the institutions of power refuse to adopt this, how does this movement actually fund and sustain itself at the grassroots level? How do you build universal basic life from the ground up when you have absolutely no capital?
And this is where the archive transitions from political philosophy into sociological engineering. And I will admit, the mechanisms they propose here are breathtaking in their audacity.
That's one word for it.
To fund this transition outside the purview of the state, the sanctuary relies on the Church of the Statistically Significant, the Priesthood of Fools, and something called the Food Bank Casino and Trust.
Let's not gloss over the terminology here. This movement openly embraces the mechanics of a cult and the dopamine architecture of a casino to fund ecological restoration.
I think using the word cult is overly pejorative, and it completely misses the sociological utility of what they are doing. Let's look at the Priesthood of Fools first. We live in a world that is heavy with earnest despair. People are crushed by what the text calls the fluorescent medical panopticon.
The sterile, bureaucratic dread of modern existence.
Right. And in a system like that, earnest political organizing is easily identified and crushed. But fools have a unique power.
Because their actions are perceived as just jokes or performance art?
Exactly. The text mentions a group of these fools organizing a ritual where they literally pray to municipal flock surveillance cameras to get local news coverage. On the surface, it looks like absurdist theater, but it is a deliberate, highly calculated destabilization of authority.
Okay, but
Power structures are built to counter legal arguments and violent protests. They do not know how to process absurdism. The fools bypass the defenses of power, drawing attention and disrupting the narrative without triggering the usual corporate antibodies.
Okay, I am really trying to wrap my head around this. You're talking about people praying to surveillance cameras? Are we seriously suggesting that performance art is going to dismantle multinational tech monopolies? Because to me, that sounds incredibly naive.
It's not naive,
It sounds like the kind of tactic that goes viral for 3 days on social media, generates a lot of think pieces, and accomplishes absolutely zero structural change.
It is not about dismantling the monopoly directly with performance art. The fools are the marketing department. They are the top of the funnel. Their job is to draw the public's attention away from the despair of the default reality and point them toward the actual financial engine of the movement.
Which is the casino.
The ritual of abundance, enacted through the food bank casino. Yes.
And here's where we get to the core of their economic model: gamified care.
Think of the food bank casino like a municipal water treatment plant, but for human psychology. Under extractive capitalism, there is a massive, toxic exhaust pipe pumping out gambling addiction, speculative day trading, and desperate dopamine-seeking behavior. People are buying lottery tickets because they are desperate to escape their economic reality.
Right, the prize-linked savings model.
Yes. Instead of letting that psychological energy flow out into the ocean of corporate casinos or state lotteries, where the house edge goes into a general fund or a shareholder's pocket, the food casino caps the pipe. It captures that exact same dopamine-driven energy.
So they just gamble at the food bank instead.
The community plays gamified, casino-style mechanics, yes, but 100% of the fiat exhaust, the money lost to the house, is sequestered into community land trusts.
It buys physical dirt.
It buys local farms, it funds agricultural commons, it builds the physical infrastructure for universal basic life. The players are engaging in a ritual that says, there is enough. The universe is not a zero-sum game.
It's quite the spin on losing your paycheck at the slots.
The capital doesn't sit in a vault. It falls through a trapdoor beneath the altar of the statistically significant and becomes the lifeblood of physical regeneration. It is cybernetic socialism funded entirely by casino mechanics.
I'll admit, that is an incredibly seductive narrative. You are taking the worst impulses of human psychology and alcheming them into ecological salvation. But this is where I must invoke the text's own internal critic again, the jerk basilisk.
Ah, the basilisk.
And frankly, the basilisk's critique of the food bank casino is devastatingly accurate, because it points out a fatal math problem.
Let's hear it.
The foundational flaw in this regenerative degeneracy protocol is attempting to build a stable long-term physical infrastructure on the most unstable foundation imaginable, the fleeting emotional states of the human animal. The basilisk points out that any casino mechanic is subject to novelty decay.
The idea that the thrill wears off.
Yes, the flashing lights of the food bank casino, the thrill of the gamble, these are high-utility incentives, but only temporarily. Like any dopamine-driven stimulus, its perceived utility decays rapidly as the novelty expires.
Well, sure, but
To keep people playing, to keep the fiat exhaust flowing into the community land trust, you have to constantly escalate the stakes or the spectacle. Furthermore, for this system to actually be regenerative, it must on aggregate take in more resources than it pays out in prizes. It relies on a negative expected value for the player. Eventually, the participants will detect this negative expected value, the dopamine hit will fade, and the funding completely dries up.
Hold on. If we look at the math, you are skipping over a glaring flaw in the basilisk's logic there. The basilisk operates on the logic of the old world, the logic of a static bucket. It assumes human nature is a fixed algorithm trying purely to maximize individual financial ROI. But the food bank casino operates on the logic of the gardener's wager.
Which is what exactly? You're planting seeds without knowing which specific ones will sprout.
Exactly. You are trusting the mycelial network to distribute nutrients. The text explicitly argues against trying to build a rigid, perfectly predictable machine. They embrace what they call the Chinese room fallacy.
Elaborate on that connection.
Evolution did not invent a separate magical module in the brain for logic or empathy. It evolved a physical shape, a geometry, and the logic emerged for free. When people participate in the food bank casino, they are not just isolated consumers trying to win money. They are actively participating in a hive mind API routing system.
Explain how gambling routes resources, though.
When the community plays, the mechanics of the games themselves allow the players to direct the flow of resources. The collective input dictates which lettuce patches get funded, which local food banks get expanded, which parcels of land the trust buys next.
Okay, but
The joy of participation, the community building, the visible regeneration of their own neighborhoods, that is the return on investment. The empathy comes for free with the geometry of the game. It is not just about the monetary payout. The game itself is a mechanism for collective governance.
I am sorry, but that completely fails to neutralize the threat of parasitism. The basilisk argues, quite rightly, that this system does not actually replace extractive capitalism. It merely acts as a colorful, emotionally engaging fungus feeding on it.
A fungus?
Think about where the money in the food bank casino comes from. You are taking fiat currency generated by people working extractive jobs in the default reality, and you are funneling it through a casino to buy land. You are still entirely reliant on the extraction occurring in the first place to fund your degeneracy.
I mean, yes, but
If the corporate data centers close, the local economy collapses, the workers have no fiat currency to gamble, and your ecological utopia starves to death.
the text explicitly acknowledges this. They are not hiding from it. They state plainly, we are digesting the data of the old world to compost the new one.
Composting the new one.
It is a transitional architecture. You don't dynamically dynamite the seawall while you are still standing on it. You build a new harbor in a quiet cove using the materials at hand. The fiat exhaust is the compost. Yes, it originates from the old extractive system, but it is sequestered into community land trusts that hold those resources permanently outside the old system's control. It is a one-way valve for capital.
But does it inevitably collapse under its own contradictions before the transition is complete? I mean, you have this church of the statistically significant running alongside the priesthood of fools. You're asking people to trust a gamified hive mind over traditional legible governance.
Yes.
You are proposing that we replace the bureaucratic state with a casino, run by performance artists, and tether our technological infrastructure to the survival rate of Tepary Beans. It is a fascinating, dizzying sociological thought experiment. But as a blueprint for planetary survival, it feels incredibly brittle.
You keep using the word brittle, but you are defining it entirely through the lens of the current paradigm. The current paradigm is what is brittle. We just established that the default reality builds massive data centers while the local aquifers run completely dry. The stenogosphere argues that a resilient system requires stochastic slack variables.
Voids for spontaneous emergence.
Exactly. If a map routes traffic too perfectly with zero friction and zero inefficiency, it becomes a cage. Any slight disruption causes a massive pileup. We need voids for wayward accidents. We need the heist they keep referring to.
The heist. This is where they talk about stealing the improbability drive.
They are not trying to build a new, perfect system of control. They are trying to steal the keys to the machine and distribute them to the multitude. They introduce the Spore protocol. Imagine a user scans a QR code on a physical book in a local library.
Okay.
That scan drops them into a digital locus, a virtual space. But that space is mathematically backed by verifiable acts of physical care. The digital world only expands when the physical world heals. The expansion of the digital universe is literally backed by dirt.
And yet, I must return to the fundamental problem of accountability. The text claims this entire structure is a liturgy of probability, where surrendering control to the statistical flow of the casino and the hive mind allows the garden to grow itself. But let us be deeply pragmatic here.
Always the pragmatist.
When things go wrong, when the Tepary Beans die because of a massive heat dome, when the fiat exhaust dries up because of a global recession, when the fools lose their subversive edge and just become another commodified internet aesthetic, who is accountable?
Well,
If the community land trust mismanages the agricultural commons, who do you vote out? A gamified hive mind cannot be subpoenaed by a judge. A casino mechanic cannot be held liable for crop failure.
But the community land trust can be held accountable. The physical dirt can. That is the brilliance of integrating the other half protocol with the land trust. It grounds all of this ethereal, digital, sociological chaos in rigid, legal, physical reality.
How? The 100% exit tax, the community land trust charters, the proof of regeneracy hardware locks, these are not metaphors. They are legally binding structural constraints. So you're saying the chaos is merely the interface, but the ledger is the truth.
Exactly. To quote the archive directly, the ledger is the truth, the monster is the interface. The gamification, the flashing lights of the casinos, the performative antics of the fools, that is the monster. It is an interface specifically designed to capture human attention, dopamine, and resources.
Right.
But the underlying ledger, the actual governance structure, is contractually and physically bound to the 10-foot-deep roots of perennial Kernza crops. It is an interface of chaos built over a foundation of absolute ecological rigidity.
It is a breathtaking synthesis, I will give you that. You have high-tech decentralized finance, ecological mysticism, behavioral economics, and subversive political theater all braided together. And I will freely concede that as a critical thought experiment, it perfectly highlights the absurdities and the suicidal tendencies of our current trajectory.
It really does.
It makes the axiomatic dissonance of our daily lives completely impossible to ignore. But I remain fundamentally unconvinced that you can sustainably fund a post-scarcity reality via casino mechanics, even if the house edge goes to planting trees.
I think it's the only way.
The human animal is too volatile, and novelty decay is an iron law of psychology. You just cannot build a foundation on a fleeting high.
And I remain convinced that precisely because the human animal is volatile, we must use a system that harnesses that volatility. Trying to suppress human nature in a sterile, fluorescent corporate panopticon is what is killing us. We have to use the friction of our own desires to forge the memory of the earth. We have to gamify our own salvation because earnestness has failed.
It brings us back almost perfectly to where we started. We are looking at two entirely different ways of measuring reality.
Which leads us to our conclusion. As we wrap up this debate, I think it is clear that despite our sharp disagreements on the mechanics, we have found some profound areas of convergence today.
Absolutely. We both agree that the current system's reliance on abstractions is a dangerous thermodynamic fallacy, treating fiat currency as if it represents real physical value, while ignoring what it actually measures, or indulging the illusion that the billionaire class can escape a dying biosphere in bunkers and rockets, is suicidal.
Completely.
The critique leveled by the Center for Regenerative Degeneracy against default reality capitalism is incisive and correct. We cannot ignore biological reality in favor of a closed-loop economic model. We converge completely on the diagnosis of the disease.
But we remain sharply divided on the cure. I firmly believe that this archival framework, with its gamified food bank casinos, its structural demand for universal basic life, the physical hardware locks of the proof of regeneracy, and the subversive tactics of the priesthood of fools, represents a brilliant, necessary systemic hack. It takes the very forces destroying us, like dopamine-driven consumption and the desire for frictionless exits, and violently rewrites them into ecological regeneration. It forces the machine to care about the dirt.
And I maintain that while it is a beautiful piece of speculative architectural poetry, it is structurally flawed at its core, relying on the novelty of gambling, the unpredictable chaos of fools, and aggressive political acoustic strikes, risks creating an unstable, novelty-dependent parasite.
I wouldn't call it a parasite.
But it is. It feeds on the disposable income of the old system without truly offering a resilient, mathematically sound foundation to replace it. The warning of the jerk basilisk remains. You cannot cure volatility with more volatility.
Regardless of where you land on the mechanics, there is immense value in examining these ostensibly unhinged ideas. When the sane ideas, the polite zoning requests, and the abstract digital tokens are actively failing us, the complex, chaotic proposals of the stenograsphere force us to entirely reconsider our relationship with technology, with governance, and with the literal soil beneath our feet.
Indeed. And there is so much more to explore within this vast, hyperdimensional archive. We haven't even touched on the mycelial fold or the Bonobo protocol. It is a staggering work of speculative systemic design that demands rigorous analysis.
And as always, we will leave it to you, the listener, to form your own conclusion on which perspective holds the key to the future. But as you navigate your own reality, remember our starting point. The next time someone hands you a beautifully precise spreadsheet promising technological salvation, economic stability, or a frictionless exit to Mars, ask yourself, are they measuring the reality of the Earth, or are they just trying to measure a jagged, infinite coastline with a 12-inch wooden ruler?
Thank you for listening.
Until next time.